philosophy and religion. I kind of fell into it. I don't know whether you believe that God guides things. I went to Boston University because my father said I didn't have to go to the University of Maryland. And I thought Boston was a nice city, and there's probably a school called Boston University. So I went there and fell into one of the great religion departments in the United States at the time. So, did God guide that? I don't know, but I've certainly relied upon those kinds of things happening in my life frequently. I was ordained in 1976. Before that, I was a student at Hebrew University in Jerusalem for a year, and the Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem for a year. So I studied in Jerusalem for a couple of years. I came directly to Kansas City, and my career has been very unusual in that I've spent my entire career here. I was at Congregation B'nai Yehuda, the oldest Jewish congregation in Kansas City, for 12 years. And then a congregation was founded called Beth Torah, which is on 127th Street between Knoll and Lamar. And I'm the founding rabbi there and was there for 26 years, and then thought they'd had enough of me and decided to retire. I have 3 biological children, and my wife has 2 children that I consider to be pretty much my own. So they range in age from 42 to 26. They're all of them paid in tuchus, but we love them all. I don't know how you all feel about your kids. Did anybody's children turn out differently than you thought they were going to? Okay. I have a doctorate in liturgy, which is my true love, and I would really rather speak to people about liturgy and Jewish art than anything else. But this topic of the Middle East has raised its ugly head, and I will begin with the idea that most people, unfortunately, do not have the background to be able to evaluate either Palestinian ideas of what's going on or Jewish ideas of what's going on, or to understand the conflict. And so we find ourselves in the very uncomfortable position of people getting information in the morning and going out and saying some really terrible things in some instances in the afternoon. So I want to give you some Jewish background. It will not be unbiased. I've not been anything but Jewish my entire life. And, my perspective is from our tradition, but it is an educated perspective. By the way, the imam that you had here, the service that I was at, he and I had a lovely lunch, and he was raised about 15 miles from where I was raised in Baltimore, and he's a lovely guy, and we did not discuss the Palestinian-Israeli situation. Okay, so what I want to begin talking about is your question, what is Zionism? But I'm not going to define it right away. I want to give you a little history, and it's this that I'm concerned about so that you understand what the Jewish experience is like. I was born in 1949, 4 years after the Holocaust, and 9 months my due date was 9 months to the day after the founding of the State of Israel. You can figure that out on your own. And I've grown up with those two realities, or I grew up with those two realities. When I was coming up, and through my ordination and coming to Kansas City, the 2 topics that were at the top of the Jewish agenda in those years were the Holocaust and the State of Israel. They have been central in your lifetimes, looking around the room for most of us. They have been central to the Jewish community, and the welfare of the Jewish community and the survival of the individuals in the Jewish community are paramount on our emotional list, and I stress emotional besides intellectual. Friends of mine are children of Holocaust survivors, people who escaped the Holocaust, people who were in the Holocaust, meaning they were in concentration camps. Holocaust denial is a horrible thing. when you talk to these people about what they have suffered, and you need to understand that the Jewish community worldwide, and I may get teary, will not go back to that. It's an absolute. No one will go back to that. So what happened on October the 7th, from the Jewish perspective, is Auschwitz all over again. The purpose of the Israeli government, and the reason that Netanyahu, who I don't like at all, okay, you need to understand that, okay? But the reason he's been prime minister for longer than anyone else is up until October the 7th, people believed that he was the security prime minister, that he had arranged that to neutralize the Palestinian Authority, Hamas in Gaza, and that everything was fine, and major events like the Second Intifada of the early 2000s, on which people were killed on buses that were blown up or killed in the street, that was not going to occur again because of his strategy. Now, you can accept that notion or not, but we're not talking intellectual here. Okay? This is where the Jewish community lives. Not everybody. My children's generation is far different, far different. Again, the children are between 42 and 26. They are far different from my generation in terms of their emotional commitments to the tragedies of Jewish history. They do not relate. I mean, I've tried to say to people, the Holocaust is as far from my children as the Civil War was from my birth. Right? So they know the stories, but they do not relate to it the way I relate to it. There's a young around here somewhere.
You're sitting on it. Just behind it.
This is what happens when you get old and your hair gets thin. In case some of you were wondering. I had really nice curly hair for a good many years, and I woke up one morning and it was gone. I have no idea what happened. Okay, so how did we get to where we are? Religion structures how we think about reality. That is a major sociological function of religion. This, by the way, is what I did my undergraduate and much of my studies since in, how religion functions in our lives. And so the Jewish reality, transmitted through our history as far as people know it, through our reading of the Bible as far as people know it, through our liturgy, which is subliminal, and people don't realize that they're getting this perspective, but it's very much there in our liturgy, and people do sometimes attend. We're liberals and they don't attend much, but they do attend, okay? The centrality of Israel is everywhere in Jewish life. Not the last 75 years, but the last 2,000 or 3,000. From the Bible, 3,000 years ago, going back to King David, to today. Israel is central. You go into my synagogue, people know that, I think they know, that when we pray towards Jerusalem. If you're in the Negev desert, you face north. If you're in Kansas City, you face east. If you're in Europe, you face south, right? Because you face towards Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is our spiritual center. Now, I can't always tell you the impact of this, but I can tell you, I believe, that people are aware, and this makes a difference. The combined myth of the centrality, and by myth, by the way, I mean an overwhelming truth, okay, that we portray in stories. I don't mean a lie, the common use of myth. Right? We're going to talk about a parable this morning in the sermon, okay, and I consider that parable to be true, okay. I'll talk about it a little bit, okay, which sets up a mythology of how we relate to God. Okay, it's not a lie, it's an underlying truth. And the underlying truth of Jewish life is this history of the centrality of Israel. Now, how did Israel get to be? And I'm going to try and make this brief. In the 19th century, in Europe, besides the fact that Jews were persecuted in many places, there was a nationalist movement for the formation of countries, right, that would express a national identity. Italy comes together as a country, Germany comes together as a country, okay? And in the second half of the 19th century, there are Jews writing about the revival of Jewish nationality. Not all of them about Israel. Anyone ever heard of Azerbaijan? Azerbaijan is the Jewish country inside of Russia. It was established by Stalin. It's on the railroad line, the Trans-Siberian Railroad line. If you went on that Trans-Siberian Railroad line and got off in Azerbaijan, the signs were in Yiddish. And it was intended by Stalin as a homeland for the Jewish people of Russia, believe it or not. There were multiple writers who spoke about the revival of the Jewish people politically or culturally. There were Yiddishists who wanted to revive Jewish culture through Yiddish. There were Hebraists, I'm going to talk about that in a moment, okay, who wanted to revive Hebrew. And there was a trial in 1894 in France of a man named Alfred Dreyfus. And Alfred Dreyfus was convicted of being a spy for the Germans against the French. You gotta get that right. Okay? And everybody knew that he had not done it. Emile Zola, who was no lover of the Jewish people, wrote a famous essay called J'accuse, in which he lambasted the government, okay, for their anti-Semitism in convicting Alfred Dreyfus. And the reporter from a Viennese newspaper called the New Press, a man by the name of Theodor Herzl, who was an assimilated Jew, who was not a religious man, thought that he could resolve the problem of anti-Semitism by founding a Jewish country. And he started in 1897, after writing a book called Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state. He started a movement called the Zionist movement to establish a state for the Jewish people, so that the Jewish people would have a place to go in order to not suffer from anti-Semitism, because every place we've lived, we have suffered from anti-Semitism. Until the modern world, we were outsiders everywhere. Everywhere. Expelled from every country in which we've lived at one point or another, with the exception of Denmark. I think that's true. So Jews always knew that life anywhere was temporary. As a child growing up, I was regularly asked, what if it happens here? And then we would laugh. Everybody knew what the it was, and everybody thought it couldn't happen in the United States until a couple of weeks ago. So if you want to know why your neighbors are fearful, why people are saying they're not going to wear a mezuzah, they're going to take the mezuzah off their door, it's because they're afraid of getting shot in their homes. Now, I wrote a column that a number of people have read that said, not so quick. It ain't that bad. But people are scared. And they're not scared just because of the facts. They're scared because they grew up with what it means to be Jewish. And the Israel I knew was an Israel that was a place to go so that you wouldn't have to suffer from anti-Semitism. At least in Israel, they couldn't kill you. By the way, the they is you. I mean, I think you need to know that. So, There was another form of Zionism at the same time. It's founded by a man who was a Jew. He was not a religious Jew, he was a cultural Jew. His real name was Asher Ginsburg. His writing name was Achad Ha'am, one of the people. And he was a cultural Zionist, the founder of cultural Zionism. And his Zionism was there would be not a state for the Jewish people, but a collection of the Jewish people in the land of Israel, which was at his day, the Ottoman Empire. It was Ottoman Syria, it was not Palestine. By the way, Palestinians, from the time the British took over in 1918 until the founding of the State of Israel in 1948, Palestinians were anybody who lived in Israel. I have articles at home referring to the Jews of the land of Israel as Palestinians. Okay, so if you hear this whole argument about there's no such thing as Palestinians, that is a completely politicized thing, okay, that we're probably not going to get into. But it's just entirely politics to prove somebody's point from one side or the other. Okay. Ahad Ha'am's idea of Zionism, so to speak, he didn't use the word, okay, is a central place from which we revive medieval Jewish culture and make it into modern Jewish culture. Does anybody ever go to Beth Shalom, the synagogue here? You know the chazan there, the cantor, the woman who sings the services? Tal Ben Yehuda. Her great-grandfather revived the Hebrew language. That is not an overstatement. Ben Yehuda, I'm blanking on his first name, Eliezer Ben Yehuda, single-handedly revived medieval Hebrew and made it into a modern language. And I believe that's the reason Tal keeps her last name. Okay? She wants it. Any place you go in Israel, there's a Ben Yehuda street. Okay? Israel revived the language, the historic language of the Jewish people. So the continuity of Israel for Jews is absolute. The Temple Mount is where Solomon built the first temple. Ezra the scribe built the second temple. Herod knocked that one down and built the second temple replaced. Jews have prayed in that direction and hoped for a resurrection of the second temple for 2,000 years and have gone home to this day. And anybody who wants to argue that we are not indigenous to that land is looked upon as being ridiculous. Now, my last point is, I'm not particularly a Herzlian Zionist. I'm more an Achad Ha'am person, because my fluency in Hebrew is because I lived there for 2 years. And I go back and forth, and until, did you all hear about this thing that happened, COVID? Did that get out here? Anyhow, until COVID, I went every year, as much as I could go, and study, and read Hebrew. And I'm sent Hebrew articles on a daily basis, some of which I get to read, some of which I don't. But the point is that my literacy is because of the state of Israel. And Jewish culture in the United States is highly dependent upon developments in the state of Israel. We have historically been tied together as a single people, yes, but now culturally, that's critical to worldwide Jewry, of which there's about 15 million of us. So what has happened on October the 7th is looked upon, unlike the other wars, and maybe the Yom Kippur War, and what happened before the Six-Day War. Not once the Six-Day War happened, when it was a sudden victory, but before the Six-Day War, when they were dedicating parkland as cemetery land for all the thousands of people who were going to be killed, okay, in that war. See, some people around here got the same kind of hair I got, and you may remember the war, right? October the 7th was an existential crisis for the Jewish people, and with the anti-Semitism that's risen in Europe and in the United States, it's become an existential crisis everywhere. So that's my little bit of an introduction. I think we have until about 11 o'clock, although I hear you stop beforehand.
So probably
And
10:50.
You know, I can't call you Gar. I'm sorry.
It's fine.
Okay. I told the father, I don't inhale in 12 minutes. He gave me 12 minutes to speak. I always said to my guy, I don't inhale in 12 minutes, so I'll try and keep it short. So my answers may be long, but let's talk. Okay? I mean, what do you want to know about this? How can I help you with a perspective? But I'm a two-state guy. I think there should be a Palestinian state. I'm with the late former foreign minister of the state of Israel, Abba Eban, who said the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Okay? That's my view of Palestinians, what's happened with their movement. But if you want to know, did Golda Meir help them along? No, she did not. You want to know if Netanyahu has helped them along? No, he does not. He is not interested in there being a Palestinian state, okay, and has done a lot to make that not happen. It is a very complex and difficult situation. There will not be justice. There's no way to get justice. Peace may be a possibility 50 years from now. Yeah.
So, I think there's a lot at play in how this is perceived. And you have anti-Semitic people, and then you have people, we as a culture tend to celebrate and root for the underdog.
Yeah.
Those are people you can win in terms of support and perception. How do you, okay, the two-state solution, that's one way you can win, but that's not really the stance of the government of Israel at this time for a whole host of reasons. So how do you talk with people who, have a tendency to support the underdog versus, the David versus Goliath, right? How do you
I get it.
yeah.
There are people I've kicked off my Facebook page because I believe they're anti-Semitic. And as Golda Meir said, you can't argue with, I'm not going to entertain an argument that says I ought to be dead. And some of these people, they won't admit to it because it's not a polite thing to say, but that's what they want. I don't know how many of you have seen the recent book by, what's her name? Dara Horn. People love dead Jews. People love to celebrate the fact that there used to be Jews in a particular place and ain't it a shame what happened to them. But we're not interested in being those people. People read the morning paper and arrive at conclusions. Like you said, they side with the underdog. I have regularly said since October the 7th, you start with the return of the hostages. Hamas took the hostages. They are in charge of the hostages. I have no patience with people who do not mention the hostages first. I had an argument with a well-known local Muslim woman who's basically been the spokesperson in the Palestinian community for many years. Online on my Facebook page, we have been, I don't know how to describe it. We've never been in one another's homes, but I think we have respect for one another. And, she wanted the cessation of the bombing, and I said, you need to come out and say the hostages need to be released and the bombing will stop. Now, did Netanyahu call Mark Levin and promise him that? No. Okay? But I believe that's the case. The hostages have to be first, and Hamas is entirely in charge. And that's what I say to people. And the people who are saying, including a guy I went to high school with who's not happy with me right now, so on my Facebook page, and he wants a ceasefire. And I think, again, Darrell Horn, I think that's a formula for dead Jews. And I have no patience with it. Sorry, none. College friend of mine, we've been friends since Boston University. We sat next to one another in Bible class. And we went to Hebrew University together, and he married one of the girls in the class and stayed. And we've been friends for 55 years. Moved his daughter from the northern border into his little house, not a house, apartment, in Jerusalem because he won't have his children in the way of Hezbollah rockets. And so she and her kids moved into his home. That's 250,000 Jews, Israelis, have had to leave their homes during this conflict rather than get shelled or take a risk, okay, of various other things. I get asked on a regular basis for money to help pay for people food or whatever. So I just tell them the truth as I see it, which is, you want to argue logically? Hamas controls this situation. Release the hostages, and we'll know what happens. To my mind, one last comment, if people are not willing to say release the hostages, and that's the first thing they're willing to say, they're not serious. They're not serious. I don't know how many of you have seen, there's a couple of things on videos on, they're just making the rounds. An Arab, a Yemeni, said, y'all weren't upset when the Syrians killed, there's been a civil war in Syria for the last 10 years. Hundreds of thousands of people have died. There's a war going on in Yemen. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed by the Saudis. What he said, this Yemeni guy, you all don't care when Arabs kill Arabs. You care when Jews kill Arabs. And that makes me think that you care about what happens with Jews, not what happens with Arabs. What you care about is that Jews that you don't like anyway, right, are persecuting people that you don't care about, but you will care about them because there's Jews involved in the situation. To my mind, that's an objective analysis. I don't understand. I do understand all the deaths. Believe me, I'm on the verge of tears all the time. All the time. I'm an emotional person, and I am always this far from breaking down. But I can recognize when people want me dead. And and when I say that, by the way, if you want my friends in Israel to be dead, that's me. You may as well say, I don't want you to survive. That's me personally. This is a very personal thing. Now, do I want all those Palestinians alive? Yes, I do. I do. But not to sacrifice the people who I think are right. I have to emphasize, what Netanyahu has done on the West Bank is unconscionable. The murders that have occurred recently by the settlers are unconscionable. If you want to follow somebody, follow Rabbi Arik Asherman, Arikascherman, Rabbi Arik Asherman. He is the great champion of the Palestinians on the West Bank, has put his life on the line for decades, literally put his life on the line, against the settlers and for Palestinian and Bedouin rights. There are people who are working in this area, okay? Support yad b'yad, hand in hand, the Arab-Israeli schools, okay? Where the Arab kids and Jewish kids, I should say Muslim and Christian Arabs and Jewish Israelis are studying together in the schools. They're learning how to get along. Those are the places to support. Do not take the side of somebody who says, you know, you're wrong and I hate you because. That is not a solution. It never is going to be one. Come on, guys, yeah.
I have 2 candles. At the Jewish Community Center, as you walk in, there's a table, and it's a lovely reminder of these precious people who are being held hostage. And around the table are chairs, and there's photographs of all the people, and then they have a basket with candles. And I've taken 2 candles, and they both have pictures of 2 different hostages, and I've been praying for them, and it makes it all that much more real, you know, when you establish this connection, you know. So, but my grandfather was Jewish. I was raised Jewish, but my grandfather was Jewish, so I've always been a little curious about the Jewish faith.
Mm-hmm.
But my daughter is like in her early 30s, and they get a lot of stuff in social media that has kind of caused her to be anti-Semitic. So I've been trying to talk to her.
And we probably ought to talk about one thing about this. Since reading Gordon Allport's, anybody as old as I am, ever read Gordon Allport's book, The Nature of Prejudice, in college? If you went to college in the 60s, they may have assigned it. You probably didn't read it. It was too long. Anyway, Gordon Allport's The Nature of Prejudice. I can remember the books I read in college. It's what I had yesterday that I can't remember. Ask my wife. Human beings work by prejudice. That's the way the brain works. Right? We remember what happened and we judge things immediately so that the snake next to us doesn't bite us or the lion doesn't eat us. But hopefully we fill in after that real information. I understand the fact that people judge me as being a Jew because I am. And periodically somebody will say to me, well, Mark, I can pass, but you can't pass. They mean my looks, right? So what I want is, in the final analysis, not to judge anyone by the group I've put them in prejudicially. I understand you think certain things of me because you understand I'm a Jew and you don't, or I'm white or whatever, and you don't know me well enough, so you fill in the gaps. But being a moral human being means not making critical judgments until you know the reality of that person. No one is entirely defined by the group they're in. No one. And so, you know, I understand people making generalities. Just don't act on them. Just don't act on them. You know, you got a neighbor from a particular group, find out who the neighbor is and act on your information. We had Chinese kids across the street. Yeah, I thought they were probably pretty smart, and I turned out to be right. Did better than my kids did in math, I think. But it wasn't determination, it wasn't my determination. It was the fact that they made their kids study all the time. Right? It wasn't genetic. It was cultural. So, that's my problem with anti-Semitism. Right? It's judging people not on the basis of who they are, but of the group that they belong to. And I understand it's a natural tendency. But it's immoral.
Can you talk about, I want you all to connect because we've made changes in the Episcopal Church with some of our worship items, especially on Good Friday. Can you talk
Thank you.
Can you talk about the history of anti-Semitism rising on Good Friday?
Yeah. Well, is guilt be upon us and upon our children, right? Is that the book of Matthew? So I wasn't present when Jesus was crucified, and I don't take any responsibility for it. There are people I wish had been crucified, but that's personal. Which is to say, I've had enemies. Liturgy teaches us a lot about who we are. I had a philosophy professor, Gene Borowitz. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Gene or read him, but Gene Borowitz said, you tell people something for 30 or 40 years, over time they'll come to believe you. So if you go to a worship service that talks about the inferiority of a certain group, over time it's going to creep in. That's the nature, by the way, and okay, I'm the longest serving rabbi, I said this before, longest serving rabbi in the history of the Kansas City community by 1 year. Herbie Mandel at Killeth Israel Synagogue came in 77, I came in 76, and I never left. I spent my entire career here. And my sense of anti-Semitism in Johnson County has always been the same. There's just this slight sense that we're different. I saw it in the Rotary Club when I was a member of Rotary. I see it when I go places. My friends who can pass as Jews, people don't know they're Jewish, say, Mark, you just don't understand what they say about us when they don't know we're there. So, you're not going to say it to Rabbi Levin. I can guarantee you that, right? Nobody's going to say Jew him down, in my presence. But my sense is that there's a kind of benign sense that we're different, okay? And that comes from Christianity. That comes from Christian scriptures. It didn't just happen. It comes because of the culture, okay, and the literature, okay, that is embodied in our churches. Churches and synagogues are set up to segregate us and tell us what the truth is according to our view of reality. Do Jews think that their religion is superior? Many do. You're not going to suffer from Jewish prejudice, however, because there ain't enough of us to be prejudiced, to treat you badly. How many of you go to Jewish doctors on purpose? Nobody? Jews do.
My dentist is Jewish.
Well, no, but you'll hear people say, I heard people say, oh, they're very smart, I'm going to go to a Jewish doctor. Harvard is Harvard. So that's the problem. It gets into the culture. Christian scriptures are historically an explanation, as I understand them, to the Roman world of Jesus' life, and therefore prejudice against the community from which Jesus came. Pontius Pilate was not a relative of mine. I don't take any credit for the stuff that he did. I try to regularly say to people, Jesus was a Jew. He believed much of the stuff that I believe. And were I alive in the first century, it's very possible that I would understand very sympathetically as I read the Gospels and some of the letters of Paul. I probably would be very close to his belief system. He was a Jew of the first century who did not take to the Pharisaic teachings the way the Pharisees wanted them to be taken to. He was close to Pharisaism, but not precisely according to their teachings, and therefore I believe they hated him. If you're a Sadducee, you're so far away from the Pharisees that people don't care. They're clearly defined. But if you got somebody teaching approximately what you're teaching, Okay, but there's slight differences. You're afraid that people will go with him instead of with you. So you denounce him. And I think that's what happened. Jesus' teachings are very close to what became Rabbinic Judaism and very close to Reform Judaism, which is what I am, which de-emphasizes law. So it's important that Good Friday not make Jews into enemies of God.
So I'm just going to interject a little bit. So
Okay.
on Good Friday, there were particular collects, prayers that used to be said that have been taken out of our prayer book. We have ecumenical dialogues. So there are a group of rabbis that meet with bishops and lay theologians of the Anglican Communion, and we have mutual understanding and agreements back and forth. We have this with all the different denominations. And this was one of the things that over history has sort of come. The collect basically called out people who don't have faith, but it was meant to say Jewish people, and it was very targeted. And then that, along with the story of the crucifixion, there was often an overemphasis on the Jewish part and fault coming there, right? And so sometimes in Europe, Good Friday would happen, and there would be violence within the community
Against Jews.
against Jews.
Right.
So people would go to their services and leave their services and then go act violently in the community. And this is a long history of doing that. So in the modern time of the last 100, 150 years, there have been some real efforts to bridge that. Like one of the things in the Anglican Church, which we're part of, Episcopalian is Anglican, if you didn't know that. One of the things is that we have made a declaration, right, that Jews no longer need to be converted. I know that might seem strange to hear that, but that was part of a decision that we see a continuity between our faiths. Does that make sense? These are really complex issues that we could have long conversations about, not in 5 minutes. But I just want to I'm not trying to take your presentation.
No, we're good. So I'm sitting next to the major Jewish scholar in North America of liturgy. And a standard prayer at the end of our service comes up. All the Jews know it by heart. It's in Hebrew, and it's one of the things just everybody knows. You start with Aleinu, and everybody in the room goes, Aleinu Shabbat Ladon, Hakol, V'Teikadu Lal Yotzei Bereshit. They have no idea what they're saying. No one can translate Hebrew. They just know the words. I'm in this service in New York, and I turned to this scholar who is the major guy, right? And I said, you didn't say Aleinu. Why? He said, because I've been trying to convince Christians for 40 years not to say the same thing. Now, nobody thinks about the words, okay? But the prayer says, the original prayer says, they bow down to emptiness, and we worship the King of Kings. That's been taken out of the Reformed prayer book, okay? And now it says that God chose us from among all peoples. Now, I don't know how you feel about Jews saying God chose us from among all peoples, but that means he chose us and not you. Okay? I mean, that's the plain meaning. When we bless the Torah reading on Saturday mornings, we say, Asher b'chavanu mikol ha'amim, who chose us from all peoples. When we say the Kiddush on Friday night over wine, we say, Asher b'chavanu, who chose us. How many of your neighbors speak Hebrew? None. They have no idea what they're saying. Okay? They've just been repeating for the last 40 or 50 years these prayers. Now, are they aware of Jewish chosenness liturgically? I don't think so. But we're not big enough to matter, particularly in Kansas City. And that's kind of the problem. I'm trying to point out that all religions seem to do this. And this scholar wants the prayer book changed. By the way, in our prayer book, there are alternatives. Okay, now the new prayer book for the last 10 years, okay, takes that language out and says choose one of these other alternatives if you want. Okay? Most people haven't done it because they don't understand it anyway. You see what I'm saying? And they're liberals. They barely go. They go on the high holy days and when there's an event.
We know about that.
And by the way, I retired 9 years, and guess when I go? On the high holidays and when there's an event. Right up until COVID, I was going every week. Yeah, you know what? Shabbat morning, I teach a class online. I don't have to leave. I have to put a shirt on, but I don't have to put pants on. Okay.
We got time for maybe one more question.
So, yeah, just real quick, you know, I can speak for Bill. You tend to like view Jewish as this holistic thing.